One man stood alone against three of history's greatest empires. They had armies, they had navies, they had unlimited resources. He had nothing but brilliant strategy and unbreakable will. By the time they realized what was happening, he had already won. This is the story they never taught you in school. If you've ever felt like the odds were stacked against you, this story will change how you see the impossible. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up, because what you're about to hear sounds like fiction, but every word is true. Picture this. The year is 1791. The world is dominated by empires that control half the globe. Europe's greatest powers are locked in an endless game of conquest and wealth. And nowhere is more valuable than the Caribbean islands, where sugar plantations generate more money than gold mines. One small colony produces more wealth than entire continents. The empires will do anything to control it. They'll send armies. They'll spend fortunes. They'll sacrifice thousands of lives, but they never counted on him. A man born into chains who taught himself to read by candlelight. A coachman who studied military strategy while driving his masters to meetings. A leader who would rise from nothing to command armies and humble the greatest military powers on earth. His name was Toussaint Louverture, and this is the story of how one brilliant mind defeated three empires at once. Toussaint Louverture was born in 1743 on a sugar plantation in Saint-Domingue, the French name for what would become Haiti. He entered the world as property, not a person. His parents were African, stolen from their homeland and forced into slavery. The plantation was a nightmare, but young Toussaint was lucky in one respect. The plantation owner allowed him to learn to read, something forbidden to most enslaved people. While other children worked in fields under the burning sun, Toussaint devoured every book he could find. He read about ancient Roman generals and their battle strategies. He studied the campaigns of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. He learned about philosophy, politics, and the art of war. But he did all this in secret, knowing that educated slaves terrified their masters. Knowledge was dangerous. Knowledge was power. By the time he reached adulthood, Toussaint had risen to a position of slight privilege. He became a coachman, driving the plantation owner to meetings across the colony. Most people would see this as just another job, but Toussaint saw an opportunity. As he drove the carriage, he listened. He heard French officials discuss military tactics. He learned about European politics and the tensions between empires. He absorbed information about troop movements, supply lines, and the weaknesses in colonial defenses. He was building a mental map of power, preparing for a moment he couldn't yet imagine. The French colony of Saint-Domingue was a powder keg waiting to explode. 500,000 enslaved Africans outnumbered their 40,000 white masters by more than 10 to 1. The brutality was unimaginable. People were worked to death and replaced like broken tools. But in 1789, everything changed. The French Revolution erupted in Paris, proclaiming liberty, equality, and brotherhood. The enslaved people in Saint-Domingue heard these words and asked a simple question. If all men are created equal, why are we still in chains? In August 1791, the powder keg exploded. A massive slave rebellion erupted across the northern part of the colony. Plantations burned. Masters fled. The colonial order collapsed in flames and fury. But Toussaint didn't join immediately. At 48 years old, he was considered too old for war. Instead, he watched and waited, analyzing the chaos with the mind of a strategist. He saw brave rebels fighting with passion but without discipline. He saw them winning battles but losing the war because they lacked organization. When Toussaint finally joined the rebellion 6 weeks later, he didn't come as just another fighter. He came with a plan. While others sought revenge, he sought victory. While others destroyed, he built. He began organizing scattered groups of rebels into a real army. He taught them discipline. He trained them in military tactics he'd learned from books. He transformed farmers and field workers into soldiers who could stand against European troops. And most importantly, he taught them that wars aren't won by anger alone. They're won by strategy. By 1793, the situation in Saint-Domingue had become incredibly complex. 3 European empires were circling like sharks, each wanting to claim the wealthy colony for themselves. France was distracted by revolution at home. Britain saw an opportunity to seize the world's most profitable colony. Spain, which controlled the eastern part of the island, wanted to expand westward. And caught in the middle were thousands of formerly enslaved people, fighting for freedom they'd tasted, but not yet secured. This is where Toussaint's genius truly emerged. He understood something that most military leaders miss. Sometimes, the greatest weapon isn't strength, but strategy. He couldn't match any empire in resources or numbers, but he could play them against each other. So he made a move that shocked everyone. He allied with Spain. Think about that for a moment. He joined forces with a slave-holding empire to fight against another slave-holding empire. It sounds like a betrayal, but it was brilliant. Spain gave him weapons, ammunition, and military training for his troops. They taught his soldiers European fighting techniques. They provided resources that the rebellion desperately needed. And in return, Toussaint helped Spain fight against France. But here's the key. He was never really loyal to Spain. He was using them. Every weapon, every training session, every military lesson was preparing his army for the real fight ahead. During this period, Toussaint earned a nickname that would echo through history. French officers called him Louverture, which means the opening. Some say it was because he found openings in enemy lines that no one else could see. Others claim it was because he opened the way to freedom for his people. Either way, the name fit perfectly. He was opening doors that empires thought were locked forever. Then, in February 1794, something unexpected happened. Revolutionary France, desperate to maintain control of its colony, made a stunning announcement. Slavery was abolished in all French territories. This changed everything. Toussaint had to make the most important decision of his life. He could stay with Spain, which still practiced slavery, or he could switch sides to France, which had just promised freedom. He chose France, and it was a calculated masterstroke. Overnight, he abandoned his Spanish allies and pledged loyalty to the French Republic. The Spanish felt betrayed, but Toussaint didn't care about their feelings. He cared about securing legal freedom for his people. With France's backing, he now had legitimacy in the eyes of international law. But more importantly, he could now turn his trained, equipped army against his former Spanish allies. The Spanish never saw it coming. The same general they'd armed and trained was now using everything they'd taught him to defeat them. Battle after battle, Toussaint outmaneuvered Spanish forces. He captured key fortifications. He liberated Spanish-held territories. Within months, he'd pushed Spain almost entirely out of the western part of the island. But Britain was the bigger threat. The British Empire, the most powerful military force in the world, had invaded with 60,000 troops. They intended to conquer Saint-Domingue and add it to their colonial empire. British commanders were confident. After all, they were professionals facing an army of former slaves. How hard could it be? They were about to learn a painful lesson. Toussaint was now fighting the most powerful empire on earth, while simultaneously holding off Spanish forces. It should have been impossible. British generals had decades of military experience. Their soldiers were well-trained, well-fed, and well-equipped. They had the best weapons money could buy, and an endless supply of reinforcements from across their global empire. Toussaint had former slaves who'd learned to fight while harvesting sugarcane. But what Toussaint lacked in resources, he made up for in brilliance. He understood something the British didn't. This wasn't their land. They didn't know the mountains, the valleys, the hidden paths through dense jungle. They didn't understand the climate or the diseases that lurked in tropical swamps. Most importantly, they didn't have what his soldiers had: the absolute certainty that defeat meant returning to slavery. His troops fought like men who had everything to lose. Because they did, Toussaint revolutionized warfare in ways that military academies still study today. He perfected guerrilla tactics, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. He attacked supply lines instead of facing armies head-on. He burned plantations strategically, destroying British economic incentives while preserving areas under his control. He launched night raids that terrified European soldiers accustomed to traditional daylight battles. He turned the jungle itself into a weapon, drawing British troops into terrain where their advantages meant nothing. But his greatest ally was invisible: yellow fever. The tropical disease ravaged European armies while leaving locals relatively unaffected. Toussaint didn't cause the disease, but he understood its impact. He knew that time was on his side. Every week that passed, more British soldiers fell ill. Every month, the costs of occupation grew higher. He just had to survive long enough for Britain to realize the price was too high. British casualties mounted to staggering numbers. Soldiers died not in glorious battles, but shaking with fever in military hospitals. The campaign that was supposed to take months dragged into years. The colony that was supposed to generate profit was draining the British treasury, and the man they were supposed to defeat easily kept winning. By 1798, Britain had lost 45,000 men, spent enormous amounts of money, and gained absolutely nothing. They withdrew in humiliation, abandoning their conquest. The most powerful empire in the world had been defeated by a former coachman and his army of liberated slaves. Spain, already beaten back, formally ceded the eastern part of the island to France in the Treaty of Basel. Toussaint now controlled virtually the entire island. He'd fought 3 empires simultaneously and emerged victorious. But he wasn't done yet. With the colony secure, Toussaint turned to building a nation. In 1801, he drafted a constitution that was revolutionary for its time. It formally abolished slavery forever. It granted rights to all people regardless of race. It established a government with himself as governor for life. Technically, the colony was still part of France, but in reality, Toussaint ruled independently. He'd created the framework for a free nation. But across the ocean in Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte was furious. The ambitious French emperor couldn't tolerate an autonomous colony, especially one led by a former slave. Napoleon dreamed of rebuilding France's American empire. Saint-Domingue was crucial to those plans. He decided Toussaint had to go. In 1802, Napoleon sent 43,000 troops under the command of his brother-in-law. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. But Napoleon added something treacherous to the plan. He sent messages promising peace talks and negotiation. He claimed he only wanted to restore order, not reinstate slavery. He swore that freedom would be protected. Toussaint didn't fully trust these promises, but he was tired. He'd been fighting for over a decade. He'd defeated 3 empires and built something remarkable from ashes. Maybe he thought. There could be peace. Maybe they could find a middle ground. It was the first time his strategic brilliance failed him, because he underestimated Napoleon's willingness to lie. Initially, Toussaint's forces fought brilliantly against the French invasion. They won battle after battle. But Napoleon's forces kept coming. Wave after wave, Toussaint realized he was facing a war of attrition he might not win. When French commanders invited him to peace negotiations under a flag of truce, he cautiously agreed it was a trap. The moment Toussaint arrived for the meeting, French soldiers arrested him. They put him in chains, the same chains his people had worn for centuries. They threw him onto a ship and transported him to France. Napoleon ordered him imprisoned in Fort de Joux, a fortress in the Jura Mountains. The cell was deliberately chosen for cruelty. After spending his life in the Caribbean heat, Toussaint was locked in a freezing mountain prison. He was given minimal food and denied medical care. The cell was designed to break him. On April 7, 1803, Toussaint Louverture died alone in that frozen cell. He was 59 years old. Napoleon had won. The great general, who'd defeated 3 empires, was dead. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. Toussaint understood something that Napoleon never grasped. Movements aren't built on one man. They're built on ideas, and ideas can't be imprisoned. Before his arrest, Toussaint had trained dozens of capable leaders. He'd created military structures that could function without him. He'd instilled in thousands of people an understanding that freedom, once tasted, could never be surrendered. When news of Toussaint's capture and death reached Saint-Domingue, his generals didn't surrender. They fought harder. Leaders like Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe rallied the people. They told them that Toussaint's sacrifice meant they had to finish what he started. The revolution he sparked became a wildfire. Napoleon's army, despite its size and skill, began to crumble. Yellow fever ravaged their ranks just as it had destroyed the British. The fighters who'd learned warfare from Toussaint used his tactics to devastating effect. French soldiers found themselves trapped in the same nightmare that had consumed the British Empire 5 years earlier. On January 1st, 1804, less than a year after Toussaint's death, Haiti declared independence. It became the first nation in history born from a successful slave rebellion. The impossible had happened. The idea that Toussaint planted and nurtured had bloomed into reality. Think about what this meant. In an era when slavery was the foundation of global economics, when the very concept of black equality was considered absurd by most of the world, a group of formerly enslaved people had defeated the 3 most powerful empires on Earth. They'd established their own nation on their own terms. The psychological impact rippled across the world. Slave owners everywhere were terrified. If it could happen in Haiti, it could happen anywhere. The myth of European invincibility was shattered. Colonized and enslaved people across the Americas and Africa heard the story and saw a glimpse of possibility. The Haitian Revolution influenced independence movements throughout Latin America. It haunted the nightmares of American slave owners until the Civil War. Toussaint Louverture never lived to see his nation born, but his fingerprints were on every inch of it. The strategies he developed are still studied in military academies. His understanding of guerrilla warfare influenced countless future liberation movements. His ability to outthink rather than outfight his opponents became a blueprint for resistance against overwhelming odds. History tried to forget him. For decades, his story was deliberately suppressed, downplayed, or twisted. Empires couldn't afford to celebrate a man who'd humiliated them. Slave-holding societies couldn't allow him to become a hero. But the truth has a way of surviving. And today, Toussaint Louverture is recognized as one of history's greatest military strategists and freedom fighters. Before his death, Toussaint wrote something that captures his entire legacy. "In overthrowing me, you have cut down in Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the tree of liberty. It will spring up again by the roots, for they are numerous and deep." He was right. They cut him down, but the roots he planted grew into something unstoppable. One man defeated 3 empires, France, Britain, and Spain. All threw everything they had at him, and all 3 failed. He did it without formal military training, without resources, without any of the advantages his enemies possessed. He did it with strategy, intelligence, courage, and an unshakable belief that freedom was worth any price. The cost was enormous. Over 50,000 people died in the wars for Haitian independence. Toussaint himself died in a frozen prison cell, never seeing the nation he built. But that nation exists today, standing as permanent proof that the impossible is just a challenge waiting for the right mind to solve it. This man defeated 3 empires without formal military training, resources, or support. He did it with strategy, courage, and refusing to accept that freedom was impossible. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe, because history has more untold stories that will blow your mind. What would you do if you faced 3 empires? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, they said it couldn't be done, but he did it anyway.